of both. It looks like,
And
yeah,
Kevin-
a few
Kevin's
P and
not
Z
coming.
members will be here. Gavin is not joining us tonight, and Kevin is not joining us. So, for any P and Z members in the audience, just please speak into a microphone if y'all want to speak. Sorry, we're low on chairs. So,
One of you guys want to come up? Looks like it's. Yeah, it is a nice chair.
Well, it's.
I gotta earn my way out.
Yeah, come in.
We can put a chair right here.
Yeah, you put a chair here.
one additional quick reminder: we've been having a little more issues with our microphones. If you could speak directly into them, that would be helpful.
We're-
Bring
we're
them
gonna-
close as you
We're
can.
gonna share this one. Okay, good? All right.
I can talk loud enough.
We're good to go when you are.
All right.
We're live.
Okay. Here's something. All right, we are
Looking
gonna
good.
call the joint Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council meeting to order at 6:06. We'll start with roll call. Do we need to do it by,
Yes.
By board?
So
Okay.
yes, council will do one, and then P&Z.
okay, we'll start with council.
Alec Robinson.
Brooke Brown.
Phil McDuffie.
Sarah Hudson. Okay, now we will go to
Okay,
P and Z. Amy?
I'm gonna call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order at 6:07. Let's start with roll call. Amy?
Amy Rodman, present.
Greg Demas.
Dave Bench?
Mike Rhodes.
Michael Hall.
Dave Bench?
Hello? I don't know if that was somebody on Zoom that's trying to make a comment. If you are, please raise your hand on Zoom. Otherwise, if you will mute yourself, that would probably be less disruptive. Okay, do we have anything, public comments not on the agenda, Desiree? Okay.
My name is Ellen Wilson. I live at 3018 Hatley Drive. I'm concerned about a couple of things, not exactly on the ordinances, but I'd like things to be considered. One is that we paid extra for our lot to have a view of the city, and I'm sure some other people did too, for either what their house would be going for or just the lot. And I would like to see if we can make sure that if there is already an existing view, that a builder cannot build into that view. The other thing is there's been a lot of email going around where there's concern, apparently a number of people concerned about if their houses are not in compliance. They're really concerned, and my feeling is they might be against any zoning plans. There's no reason for them to be thinking that way. So I don't know how this kind of information got around the city. And that's something I think perhaps you can look into, because it's not true that, just because their house is out of compliance in the future, it's in the compliance now. So there's no reason to be concerned. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That was it, Desiree?
Yes.
Okay. Before we start the public hearing, I wanted to just clarify a little bit, because we have had some misinformation spread for whatever reason about some of the potential changes, clarifications to our building code that are being considered, and just to hopefully calm some fears. We are not talking tonight about changing the building height to 30 feet. We are not talking about making any drastic changes. We are, and this is not something that just council decided on their own that we should do, or that only a couple of people are concerned about. This is something that we have heard lots of comments, lots of input from citizens about. There are inconsistencies in our code that we are trying to clarify, and there are gaps in our code that are becoming obvious with some of the construction that is going on. And so we are trying to clarify those things. A few things here tonight that we're talking about are things that we're trying to clarify more immediately, because we have seen those issues come up over and over again. And then our, and I should remember what all the initials stand for, the Comprehensive Residential Code.
Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay,
Comprehensive
Anyway.
Code Review Committee.
yes. We have just established a citizens committee to review our residential code and come up with recommendations. There will be lots of opportunity for citizen input on that. We're trying to make sure that the citizens of Rollingwood get to decide what Rollingwood looks like, what's important for us to preserve, what's important for us to allow. And so this is not something that's being done in a vacuum or done, in a back room without lots of opportunity for people to comment and participate. So I just wanted to clarify that before we get started with the public hearing. And if that is it, we will call up. Okay,
Item three.
Ashley has something to say before we
This-
start this. So-
This is just
okay.
item 3, sorry, I think
Okay.
that's supposed to be under there.
Okay.
I'm gonna call up item 3.
I will call up item 3, update regarding the joint public hearing process.
So we had a request to clarify this process. This is our first joint public hearing between the P&Z and the City Council. We've had joint meetings before, but this is a different process that as of, I believe, last council meeting at the February City Council meeting, an ordinance was passed that allowed joint public hearings between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. Not every public hearing process will always be a joint public hearing. Per our ordinance, it says the City Council may at its discretion at a properly noticed public meeting determine that a public hearing shall be held before both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And so if that determination is made at a public meeting and the City Council votes on it, that's what triggers the joint public hearing process. Otherwise, any other public hearings that doesn't happen for, they will still be held separately between the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And so what this does is just the noticing requirements would just include both items at the same notice public hearing when we have a joint public hearing. There still is a requirement for the Planning and Zoning Commission to make a recommendation before the City Council does. This just allows it to happen in one meeting as opposed to 2 separate meetings. So just wanted to give that update.
Okay. We'll move on to item number 4, public hearing regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances, Sections 107-3 definitions, 107-75 yards generally, and 107-76 minimum required depth and width of yards relating to building projections into requested yards and the definition of yard in the R residential zoning district. We'll open the public hearing at 6:15. Do we have anybody signed up to speak? Okay, well, if there's nobody signed up, we will close the hearing at 6:16. And then we will go to agenda item number 5, public hearing regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances, Sections 107-3 definitions and 107-71 maximum permissible height related to the definition of building height, residential and residential building height in the R residential zoning district. And we will call the public meeting to order at 6:17. Anybody signed up for this one? Okay. We will close the public hearing at 6:18. Okay, well, I will say we'll note that Tony Stein has joined the meeting here a minute or two ago. There was a lot of concern expressed at past meetings about not having opportunity for public input. And I find this really disappointing that we have noticed again and published again and brought everybody together again, and we have no public comment on this, so, anyway. But here we are. So, at this point, we will recess the city council meeting and let the P and Z
Okay.
take over.
All right, we're going to get into the discussion on these items
You wanna come up?
so that we can make a determination as to what our recommendation is going to be to city council. So,
No, doesn't matter. That's fine.
We'll say they temporarily recess the city council meeting
all right.
Do you want them to leave the dais?
No, they don't, no,
Okay.
they can do whatever they want.
Okay,
Happy to have them sit wherever they want.
okay. And I'll just let them keep going.
Yeah.
okay. What we're here is to review or make a recommendation regarding planning and zoning, discussion on possible action regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances, Sections 107-3, definitions 107-75, yards generally, and 107-76, minimum required depth and width of yards related to building projections into requested yards and the definition of yard in the R residential zoning district. We've had a lot of discussion about this in the past. Do we have a motion?
I will move that we adopt the amendments as stated in our packet.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion, second, no discussion. All favor of passing as written, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item 7. Similar fashion, we're considering discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances 107-3 definitions and 107-71 maximum permissible height related to the definition of building height, residential and residential building height in the R residential zoning district.
Save confusion.
Do we have a motion?
I will move that we adopt the amendment
We
as
just
stated
bring
in
back
the
the
packet.
Dominguez
I
stuff.
believe it's on page 5.
Okay.
Because it's not included in that.
Do we have a second?
I just want to be, do we have discussion now or do we wait?
After.
After.
After,
Yeah.
after a
Excuse
second. Second? We have no second. All right. Point of order, am I allowed to second the motion?
Sure.
I second the motion. Discussion?
Sorry to ask for more discussion on this, as we've talked about this ad nauseum in
Mhm.
prior meetings, but I just want to be really clear on this. This is not talking about limiting the height itself. This is about the methodology for measuring it. I mean, I'm reading it here in front of me, obviously, but I just want to be clear that that's what we're discussing here. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, my view on this, just as we're in discussion, continues to be kind of consistent with what I've said at prior meetings, which is, you know, now we've officially formed a commission to review all of this. And, you know, I view getting into kind of any of the details of height, be it changes to, you know, to actual height, which obviously aren't discussed in this proposed language, but just any modifications around that, I view as exactly what the city council formed the commission for. I think the other one I differentiate where, we have kind of a clear, discussed scenario where we have a hole in the code, that would allow, could potentially allow for, extensions of the building to go all the way to the property line, and that's clearly something that needs to be adjusted. I don't think these changes, are in some ways not tremendously material, but in other ways too, I just say we're kind of starting down a road on building height that I think is better served through full discussion with the new commission that's been formed. That's my opinion.
Let me understand, Tony. So you're saying that you don't want to take this action on at all at this point, or it's only really the building height piece that we're not going to take on? The actual number.
No, I know this doesn't discuss the number. My personal view is that we really shouldn't be getting into height at all, given that that's one of the primary concerns that's been expressed and one of the principal, direction I think that's going to be given to the commission to consider. So I don't think this really does anything, quote unquote, solves anything that the concerns about height have been put forward. So I just don't see the point, honestly. But that's just my opinion.
I agree with Tony.
Yeah, I agree as well.
You know,
If this were solving some problem, I think it'd be different, but since we do have the commission to review the residential code in place now,
yeah.
this really should be part of what they do.
Is there any reason why if we don't vote this, I mean, the motion may pass or fail, but if we do vote this in, is there any reason why it still can't be reviewed again?
Actually, I just came from this comprehensive residential code kickoff meeting, right? And we had discussed briefly, about what we were going to be doing this evening. And whenever we talked about this building height discussion, we said, what we're doing is we're putting something in here that is an interim change. It's kind of biting at the edges of what we all see as being the problem. But it is something that is substantive enough that at least it'll help keep what we call gaming the system from happening, which seems to be happening in some cases. So really what is going on here is it's a very minor change. It's taking us back from a 5-foot perimeter around the building to the direct perimeter of the building. It could have substantial impact on how high a building might be that's being considered today, but it will be a special case. All of this, building heights, it will go into full consideration by this new committee, no question.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any reason they can't,
I think
re-review this. I just kind of think I would expect that there's going to be significant discussion around building height in totality, some of which may include this or maybe something completely different.
Right.
So I also don't think this is going to, it could on the margin, the 5-foot difference, if you have a very heavily sloped site, there could be some marginal adjustment for that. But by and large, for those people that, have an issue with height, whether it be the overall general adjustment of, for sloping lots or just absolute height or whatever the case may be, I don't think this change is going to materially improve any individual, scenario from their perspective, other than on the margins. If you have, how much slope can you have in a 5-foot? There could be some, but
Look out the window.
Yeah.
You can have actually quite a bit.
it's on one side. Yeah, on one side. It
Yeah.
would apply to one side of the building. Anyway, I don't have any problem with this necessarily. I just don't. I don't want to start getting into the commission, into this city council approved commissions. What I view as their primary job.
I see.
Do we see the commission as, the appointment of a commission as meaning we don't take any action at all until the commission comes up with its final work, because that could take some time.
Mhm.
And we have had problems with people gaming the system. And so these are interim proposals, like you say, they're not dramatic, you know? And so it seems to me we can still put some interim Band-Aid solutions in place, and then those interim solutions are still considered by the commission, you know, as part of the whole, when the commission comes up with its recommendation. But let's say the commission takes 3 years to come up with a final, let's hope that doesn't
Extreme,
happen.
yeah,
but
extreme. Mhm.
Let's say it takes longer than expected for unforeseen reasons, you know. And in the meanwhile, we have, you know, who knows how many more houses demolished and people getting in under the old building code. So I would just, you know, whether, you know, this motion fails or succeeds is obviously up to everybody, but it seems to me we can still approach some interim solutions here, and the commission can do its work.
Yeah.
And if the commission looks at this again and somebody says, hey, we can make this better, great.
I guess I'm a little surprised at where we are right now, because I thought in previous meetings that we had pretty good agreement on at least taking this far. Even as Amy is saying, this is not a large change, and it is our responsibility to make recommendations to City Council. The commission also will have that, or that committee will also have similar recommendation, but if you'll note, the committee charter talks about making recommendations, and those recommendations have to be endorsed by this group before they can even go to City Council. So we still have a major role in whatever is going to be going on here. I think this is just this is a very small first step in trying to bring some order or bringing some improvement to our code.
Can I ask a question, just to make sure I understand? This is a discussion regarding whether or not you should approve or deny the recommendation. Is that right? There will be a motion.
Send the recommendation to the council.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So that's why I intervened, because I started getting the impression that maybe that's what y'all were talking about. So this body does have an obligation under the law to make some type of recommendation to City Council. Tabling it indefinitely is not an option, or postponing it indefinitely is not an option. It's a ministerial obligation under the law for you to make this recommendation once it comes to you.
Yes.
And so you either need to make the recommendation to approve it or not, and then City Council will take that recommendation and make their decision. But there is a ministerial obligation on this body to make that. You can't bottleneck City Council's legislative authority by just refusing to make a recommendation.
Okay.
Just FYI.
So we
So
have
the-
a
the-
motion
So
and
the
there's a
motion's either
motion.
gonna, if it's a motion to recommend and that motion fails, then you're gonna have to have another motion to not recommend and see where that motion goes.
Okay, well, I guess we need to vote on this motion first. Is that
But-
correct?
Right, but the discussion is relevant as to whether or not it's appropriate to make the recommendation on the change or not.
Sure.
It's a perfectly
Yeah.
logical discussion to have.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make clear, y'all don't get to just say, City Council, you don't get to take this up because we're not going to make a recommendation.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. It's great. So, is there any additional discussion here? 'Cause, frankly, I am surprised by where this is going right now, but I'd like to.
I would say I'm surprised you're surprised. I feel like it's been, I mean, at least my view has been we've consistently discussed, well, if there's going to be a commission, that height would be a very obvious, primary discussion point amongst them. So I've kind of been saying consistently, I haven't been real inclined to do anything with height, assuming that council actually forms a commission that's going to fall under their purview.
Well, I think that here's my surprise, is that we got this all the way to public hearing. And that if there were strong if there was strong opposition to doing this recommendation, that it should have come up before we got it to public hearing. That's my view of it. I mean, the fact that we're here right now, I thought meant, literally, that we already agreed that this is something that needed to be done, but we needed to take it to the public first to get their input on it, give them an opportunity to comment on it. And if there was strong objection from the public, well, we probably want to reconsider, but I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that. So,
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how the public hearing, request went and if we voted on that, but I don't know, the feedback I've consistently gotten from community, I've seen it via emails, and which you probably have a better count of, but as well as just public input, was that, to the extent we make meaningful changes to the code, they'd like to see it done in, via a commission, or a task force or whatever we want to call it.
can we take comments from the audience during this period? Okay, please.
Perhaps you can hear me.
Yeah, go, you need, yep.
I don't understand what's wrong with having a definition of height, because how do people work beyond that then if there is no definition?
The definition is already there. There is a definition in. And what we're trying to do is we're taking a small step here to change the definition, to rein it in a little bit. And so that's what we're doing. Building height, it's a very nuanced subject, I can tell you. But all that we're doing is applying or considering making a small change to the building height definition, such that the method for measurement,
Yeah.
okay? Yeah,
I don't understand why that should be a problem, that's all.
okay.
I think it's just clarifying, we do have a definition currently, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that we would be changing the
Yeah,
definition.
it'd be a change to the definition, yeah.
Okay. Any additional discussion? What?
Hi.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Kendra Rollison, 301 Wallace. My thoughts on it, I think that from the beginning, I always felt like the gaming of the system was related to where the measurement was being taken from, whether it be the original native ground surface or the finished floor area. I can't remember what the code actually says. So to me, taking out the 5 feet is sort of a big change to the code. I think modifying it just so it limits that terminology related to original native ground surface versus the finished grade would solve the problem that I think some people have.
It is actually to the native surface. It is native ground. That's
But
what
are
I'm
you
saying.
but are you removing the 5 feet?
We're
rule?
removing the 5 feet.
Yeah, so that's my point. Is I think the original code, what people were doing is, it says native ground surface or finished grade, and people are measuring to the finished grade rather than 5 feet to the native ground surface of wherever they want to choose on their structure. So to me, taking away that 5 feet is what causes me concern, because I do think that's a bigger issue than just closing the loophole of modifying the language to say native ground surface versus finished grade.
Hi, Shanti Jayakumar, 3309 Park Hills Drive. I've said this before, but I don't think I've spoken in front of your body here, City Council mostly. This all relates to me, the bottom line is property rights. One person's property rights should not impinge on the neighbor's property rights. Privacy, that's what it's really about when you talk about height. I am always in fear that we back up to Austin. Our homes on Park Hills back up to Austin. I'm always constantly in fear because they can build up to 5 feet of my property line and they can go high as they want. So far, nothing like that has happened. But within our own neighborhood, so many people are struggling with lack of privacy due to height issues of the neighboring properties that have gamed the system, if you want to call it that. I know one instance where they have gamed the system, and City Council has had a lot of discussion back and forth on how to ameliorate that. It's too late by that time. So we got to do something before we have to destroy a neighbor's privacy. And one way of doing it is the yard, whatever you all have just passed. That's laudable. I really appreciate y'all doing that. The second thing, height. Definition of height should not be a problem for anybody. It's plain language. But where the problem comes is, do we allow the builder or whoever is building on that lot to come in and clear the lot first before we have had a chance to measure where they are going to be measuring the 5 feet or 10 feet or whatever it is? Obviously, that's not happening. And I'm not putting that constraint on any one person. As a body, as a community, we need to preserve the property rights and the privacy of people next door. You can build whatever you want on your property. Yeah, that's property rights, right? But what about us who've been there for decades, and all of a sudden there's a great big house next to you, and you have to kind of make sure nobody's looking before you go for a shower because they're looking down on you. These are basic things that I shouldn't have to say this in the way I said it, but it's your swimming pool. I mean, whatever you have in your own backyard, and you've enjoyed it all these decades because nobody built that high. But all of a sudden, it's coming up. We need to contain that. And therefore, I urge you to please think about you being that next door neighbor who's having to, maybe none of you have somebody who is looking down on you, so you don't know how to relate to that. I'm not suggesting you can't, but think about it. Drive around and see what's going on and see what the other person feels about somebody always looking down on their house. I mean, I could go on, but I don't want to. You get the point. We are all neighbors. As a community, we need to come together. I appeal to y'all to do that so that at least a Band-Aid solution. So I don't know how many are in the works right now. We're not trying to contain them, but we're making sure that they don't go above what we have in place right now. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Shanti.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional discussion? Okay. All right. Well, we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor in passing the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we have 2 for, 3 opposed. What do we do?
We'll need another motion.
Okay, need a
We'll
motion.
need a motion.
Someone who voted no should make the motion.
I'll make a motion to not recommend the changes to council. Yeah.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? I think I've said everything I wanted to say about it.
I guess I would just say to this that I fully support looking at the building height code and think it needs to happen and happen as urgently as possible. My position on this, just to be clear, is that I just feel that it needs to be looked at holistically, and changing a definition, as innocent as that may seem, is getting into something I believe is a lot more complex. And why I think that any change pertaining to height, which I believe is why I've said yes to the setback thing, I think it's much more cut and dry. I think height is a much more complex issue and needs to be looked at holistically. So just from a discussion standpoint, that's why I've taken a position I have here.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say largely the same thing, and I don't disagree with anything you've said, and I think we absolutely need to look at height holistically and hopefully quickly. I would advocate, because that's the most sensitive issue for the community, that be the first one taken up by the committee, and I don't see any reason why we need to wait for all recommendations from the committee. If the height is the most sensitive one, certainly they could put forward, something to us. And, I just think the proposed changes, I don't think are going to make a meaningful impact on the concerns that are largely expressed. And, you know, I also will say, you know, we've talked a lot about gaming the system, and we haven't had any specific examples come up where, you know, the city staff has said, you know, this happened and this was where there was a gray area and we didn't really felt like we had to, you know, approve that, but weren't totally confident that it met the current definition. And I'd also say that these definitions have been in place since, I believe it, in my notes, I believe it's 2012 was when these went into place. So this isn't a new change that happened. I think what's new to the community, to the extent there is that there's been more development more recently. So there's, you have an easier time seeing how this definition can play out. And I think there's plenty of scenarios that I've driven around and seen that I'm not a big fan of, and I'm not remotely opposed to, you know, potential changes that that could come out of this. I just think it needs to be more holistic. And I guess I kind of look at this as, you know, when we have a newly formed, you know, task force charged with this and other things, that I don't see much point in making a marginal change like this that I don't think is going to have a dramatic impact on what people have concerns about. And obviously city council can disagree and pass it. So.
Okay. All right. Any more discussion?
I do like the idea. I don't know how feasible it is, Dave. You're on the commission, you know. Given how long the commercial one took,
Yeah.
you know, which I believe was like 18 months, if I'm not mistaken. That's a really long time. And I don't know if it's possible, to Tony's point, on the residential one to tackle the height issue first and perhaps put forward a recommendation before going to other issues. I know there's some connectivity between height and then other things. And so, you know, it's kind of like pulling on a string on a shirt, you know, but if that is possible, that would make a lot of sense, because I do think height is the number one point of contention here.
And let's do something about it tonight.
Okay.
You know, we had our first meeting just a few minutes ago, and we're not structured, at least yet, to take on anything in any priority order. There's a list of things that are being discussed. Everyone's aware that building height is a big issue, but no one is in the committee has said, oh, okay, we ought to look at that first. In fact, there's so much on our plate that we're probably going to be breaking down that list into various components to be worked by subcommittee. Your point about how long it's taken the commercial piece to work, it's not finished yet.
Yeah.
You know, 18 months, you're right. It's going to be more than that. Those things, those changes are going to be coming to us at some point. We haven't seen hide or hair of it yet. So there's no assurance that by relying on the committee to come up with a better idea around building height or a new definition or try to put the genie back in the bottle will happen anytime soon. There's just no promise of it. We can try, and I can make a recommendation that we move it, you know, to the front of things, but I don't think anything really happens very quickly in this government. Just an observation in my short time here.
I would agree with that observation in a longer period of time here. I think the only thing that's going to make, you know, for the people that have those specific concerns, of which there are many, I think height or fundamental changes in the way that slope is dealt with are the only ways you're going to make any meaningful impact to those concerns.
Yeah,
And in fact, even with those, I think there are going to be certain situations where it's just not solvable. You know, a lot of people have talked about the one on Rollingwood Drive and the one that's for sale at Spec Home.
What, on Park Hills?
No, I'm talking about the one on Rollingwood Drive, the corner of Rollingwood and Riley.
Ryland?
You know, if you go drive by that slowly and study it, which I've done a number of times, you know, absent a one-story ranch being rebuilt there, it was going to be looming over the back. Now, there's different degrees of looming, but, you know, that one, had they built a 25-foot, two-story house and you're in that top floor, you're going to be staring right into that backyard in that house no matter what. So granted, it's taller than it could be, but there are situations that are just going to be impossible to solve based on our topography, but that doesn't mean we can't solve some of the issues with different things that have been discussed, you know, up to this point.
Yeah. I guess, you know, I'm concerned about the effectiveness of this commission, or at least the public view of what the effectiveness of this commission is if we do not, you know, make some kind of a motion to approve this. I have that concern, but also the concern of how long it's going to take for anything to get passed. We had pared this down to the point where it is a very small change in the code. We had talked about, at some point, about what the heights ought to be. There was a lot of discussion around, well, a lot of things having to do with building height at the time, but we decided that we were gonna hone it down to something smaller so that the commission could figure on or the committee could work on the larger piece. And again, I thought we had all agreement on that, but evidently I'm not right.
Well, I guess that motion has failed. There's a motion on the floor now
Yep.
to
And-
send a recommendation to the council to reject it.
Right.
The council can choose to ignore
Yep.
that recommendation if it so chooses. So I suggest we just go ahead and take a vote.
I just wanted to talk some more. All right, okay, all right, so, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any other discussion?
I'll say one more thing. Between the time that this public notice went out and today,
Uh-huh.
the proposed task force has been approved and formed by city council, which wasn't the case before. I think had they not done that, I agree with you that there's more of an impetus on us to take action. I think the majority of the feedback I've seen from community is we want this to go slow and we want this residential task force to weigh in on everything holistically. That's been the feedback I've seen.
Well, at least we voted for the approval of that committee. So that was a good effect from P and Z. All right, shall we vote? All favor of the motion as stated? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. Looks like we have 4 to 2, 4 ayes, 2 noes. The motion passes.
Charles, do we need to do anything more? or
Y'all do
we're
not.
good?
You can adjourn your meeting.
We, okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move, we adjourn.
Okay, second?
Second.
All right. Meeting adjourned at 6:50. Yep. Don't worry, I don't feel thanked.
Some progress, Dave. Some progress.
I don't know, yeah, 0 it is, yeah.
It wasn't 0.
Well, I want to say that's true, but I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we just do that, yeah. I'm gonna stick around.
We're back. And your microphone's off.
The city council meeting at 6:52. And we will bring up agenda item number 8. City council discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances, Sections 107-3 definitions, 107-75 yards generally, and 107-76 minimum required depth and width of yards related to building projections into requested yards and the definition of yard in the R residential zoning district.
Public
Do you have any
comment?
comment?
Do we take public comment first?
We've already had a hearing.
I'm seeing
So-
that our council say yes.
Yeah, I think we should probably, even though we've had a public hearing, I would take public comment on the action item.
Okay. Do we have
If
any
there is
public comment?
I move adoption of the amendments to the Code of Ordinances for 107-3, 107-75, and 107-76 related to the depth and width of yards, with one amendment. And that amendment would be to add the changes that are recommended to section 107-71 of the code with respect to height to that ordinance. So I don't know, and Charlie, maybe you could advise us whether we need to pull up both items 8 and 9. The draft ordinance just addresses 107-3 and 107-76. So I would move to adopt that ordinance, the draft ordinance, with the amendment that would add the language that has been proposed for 107-71.
Okay, so we're talking about yards right now, correct?
The ordinance, we're talking about the draft ordinance,
Right.
adoption of the
Yes.
draft.
For yards.
There's not a draft ordinance for building height, at least when I pulled
Yes.
up the agenda.
Well, there
That-
should be one in your packet.
There is now. That
Yeah.
was a late addition. We're
Okay.
sorry about
Yes.
that.
That's what
This is for-
I saw only
Yeah.
the ordinance
Yeah,
address.
so
Okay.
there should be
Okay.
now.
All right.
And so
Yes.
the first agenda
Okay.
item is for the yards, and then the second agenda item will be for the building height.
And are,
And it includes, the building, the next agenda item does include the information that you
Right,
have
okay.
referenced.
great, okay.
Okay.
Then I move adoption of the ordinance 2023-04-05-XX yards as proposed in item number 8.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. One comment, since I am clearly not the only one that didn't see the second ordinance because it wasn't there when I looked. We really, please, if you change the packet after it's posted, send an email out so that we know, because I looked at everything, thought I'd looked at everything, didn't look at it again because I didn't know there was anything new or changed on there, so.
Our
Just-
apologies. We got that in pretty late today, so we'll try to go over it all in depth, but we'll try not to make those changes.
Just notice is helpful. Okay, any discussion?
Yeah, question. Why do we remove the word landscaping from section 107-3 definitions?
What line
what's
is
the
that
purpose?
on?
Line 7.
That's because landscaping is addressed in other provisions of the code. So it's unnecessary to, the way the
Can I explain? Is that all right? I don't
I'll-
want to interrupt, but I
I'll
think,
finish in-
oh, okay. It's pretty straightforward. It's really straightforward.
I'll-
All of this
I'll-
was deleted because it's referenced in other places in the code.
that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
And where it is here, it's accepted totally out of the definition of yard, so you could never regulate it as a projection. So what this does is allow it to be addressed as it is addressed later in the code, by other sections of the code.
Okay.
Yeah. The way it was written, this is not a change in substance. This is a change in form.
Exactly. I'll speak to the substance of these proposals. This is the change to the definition of yard that is recommended here allows the city to now address projections. As the code has previously been written, yard, the definition of yard excludes any encroachment that would be a permitted projection or a cornice, eave, porch, or landscape. So the city could never regulate the placement of those because they're excluded from yard. In other words, yard is the area that surrounds your buildable footprint. And so if you've defined out of the term yard these other options, then they're not in the yard, so they can be put in the yard. They're an exception. So they can be put, anything that is a permitted projection, a cornice, an eave, a porch, or landscape can go throughout the entire yard. So this definition eliminates what was a problematic definition. Then it allows projections, cornices, eaves, and porches to be, the subsection E allows eaves and roof extensions up to a depth of 33% of the required side yard, the front and rear up to 5 feet in the front and rear yard, and any other typical residential building feature up to 2 feet. So it's a way of allowing the city to regulate those projections into yards.
So am I correct in saying that with the word landscaping in there, then that means we couldn't regulate landscaping? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Landscaping, any kind of landscaping could be done in any part of the yard because it's been accepted from the definition of yard. That's the problem.
Okay.
And so landscaping is addressed elsewhere in more detail, and we're not changing any of that.
So do you think, like, where did these numbers come from, like, for the chimney? Like,
Those came from the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation. And the Planning and Zoning Commission has unanimously approved these changes.
Anybody have any other comments?
I think these are reasonable, moderate steps that will improve our code. As was discussed in the Planning and Zoning portion of the meeting tonight, will be reviewed again by the Residential Code Review Committee. And so this is a reasonable, rational interim step to further review, in my opinion.
I will say when I read through this again, a couple things came to mind that, well, I'm not opposed to approving this as an interim step. I think that there are a couple things that we need the committee to look at to further clarify this. The first one being that there is no definition of porch in our code. And so right now, we say that the porch, uncovered porches are not restricted to staying out of the setbacks. So an uncovered porch could go however far you want it to, up to the property line, because it's not prohibited, and the stairs also. So we have several ongoing instances of construction right now where in some cases the foundation at the front of a property is, seems like 10 or 12 or 15 feet tall, I mean, really high in some places. If you put a porch on the front of that, and then you have stairs that have to go down from that porch, I measured mine just out of curiosity, kind of what's the rise to run on the stairs, and it was 2 to 3. So for 2 foot above ground, up to the porch, it stuck out 3 feet. Well, if you have a front, the front foundation is 10 feet tall, that means the stairs are gonna go 15 feet out. And if you have a porch in front of that, and then you go 15 feet out, you're taking up most of the front setback with porch and stairs that are not prohibited from, or not even prohibited, just not even mentioned at all, right? So there's no limitation. And I think part of the problem that people are expressing concerns about with the height and the projections is just the mass of some of the homes that are being built and the, I don't know, it's just very imposing. And if you have that height and then coming that close to the front of the property line, that to me is what we need to be considering, so that we don't, it just starts getting claustrophobic, right? Because there's so much mass of the house taking up the space. So I think we need to add a definition of porch and consider what limitations we would put on porch/stairs, encroaching into the quote non-buildable space of the property, which you are clearly building something into. I'm still concerned with the 33.5 or 33% in encroachment into the side setbacks, because right now our code is set up so that we have a 25-foot space between properties, right? You have to have, your side setbacks are a total of 25 feet, minimum of 10 feet on one side, 15 feet on the other side, but it's also supposed to be set up so that that matches the setbacks on the neighboring properties, so that the total space between homes is no less than 25 feet. I'm not sure how we are regulating the tear downs and rebuilds when somebody comes in and decides to pick which side they're doing the 10 foot and which side they're doing the 25 feet. And if you're sitting here minding your own business and your next door, the property next door gets torn down and they rebuild and they put something in, and then the one on the other side gets put in theory, they should not be able to put something that's less than a total of 25 feet. But even at 25 feet, if you have a 33% overhang on both sides, instead of 25 feet between homes, now we're down to 16 feet. No. You got 33 feet on each side, 33% on each side, right? So 33% of 25.
33% of 10 is 3 feet and a half. Okay.
Well, 3
You
feet and a
got
third,
2
but
times 3 and a half, make it 7, take that off, 25, 18.
No, if you've got 15 feet and you get to overhang a third, that's 5 feet. And then on the 10 feet, you get to overhang.
10-foot setback that we're working with, so the maximum would be based on a 10-foot setback. You're still talking about 10 feet, 1/3 of 10 feet.
On one side,
On one side.
but on the other
15.
side, you're 1/3 of 15
15
feet.
feet.
So that's 5 feet. So you're allowed to overhang on a total of 25 feet. You're allowed to overhang a third.
The way that it's written, it isn't that you have a 10-foot and a 15-foot setback. What you have is a 25-foot minimum requirement. That's what you've got. The setback is still 10 feet. It's not a 15-foot setback, it's 10 feet.
You can have 25 across both sides, so you can have
You're required to have a minimum of 25 feet, but that doesn't say one of them is a 15-foot setback. It doesn't say that.
It's a required yard. It's a
It's a
15-foot
required,
required
right.
yard.
So you can have 12 and a half, 12 and a half, you can have 10, 15 on one property.
Yeah, as long as you've got 25-foot spacing between the houses, that's what's talking.
It's not between two homes, it's 25 feet on your lot. So with your setbacks have to be 25 feet. I think there may have been interpretation in the past that it was between homes, but the way our code reads and the way it's interpreted is that 25 on your lot. So if you have 10 on one side, you have to have 15 on the other. You can have 12 and a half and 12 and a half. That's currently how we interpret our code.
The understanding that I always had was that there was supposed to be 25 feet between houses also. So that if you had your 10-foot side had to match up to somebody else's 15-foot side.
That's
And-
a minimum. That's all it is. It's not a has to match up or anything. It's a minimum.
Right, but if people are building up to the limits, and you have 25 feet, and now you're allowed to overhang a third, that's down to 16 feet and a third between, or 16.67 between houses. So that's getting closer and closer
At the overhang, I mean, at the,
at the
At the
edges of the,
overhangs.
edges of the
but
projections.
you've still got, the buildings are 25 apart.
No, the buildings
The-
could be
the
as
walls.
close as 22.5 if you have 12 and a half matching a 10. So the buildings could be as close as 20,
Even 20, because you could have a
22
10 and
and a
10.
half
Well,
feet
we need to
apart.
clarify that, because my understanding was always that the total had to be at least 25 feet between houses.
Sure, I can read.
These are
So-
some of the problems we have with
Right,
tacking on definitions to an old code.
well,
But I think,
from fire safety standpoint, the closer we allow the houses to get, the more fire hazard we incur. And
and that will begin to impact our insurance rates. So
And-
if you
and-
don't think you're impacted by this, you are.
fires hop from roof to roof most commonly, and the closer you get the roofs together, the easier it is for fires to spread. So, anyway, I think that we need to look into that. And if we are not if the current interpretation is not that the houses have to be 25 feet apart, then that needs to be looked at by the committee also, because I always thought that that was the whole intention.
If it is tightened up, we can use that.
Yeah,
I think
So-
that's already in there, but it does come to the point that I think maybe you're pointing to, which is if you have redevelopment on both sides of you, and both of those go to the 10-foot on your boundaries, now
you don't get it 10 feet, yeah.
you're negatively impacted because you have to go at least 15 on both of your side setbacks. So there is a potential negative impact because you're the last to develop
Right.
your
You are
lot,
You are
right?
right.
And so if there's a way for the committee to look at that, mitigating that unintended consequence, because that's kind of like, now we're getting into land of racing, who grabs it first kind of thing. And I think that inherently is unfair to some degree.
So tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like we've wandered away from
We have
adoption of
wandered,
this
but I just
ordinance
wanted
into
to
some.
put that in there. That was a wandering.
Well, no, I don't think we have. I think this is concerns with the way we are establishing this, the
I
33%.
understand. I understand that. My point is that that's a nice statement. Those are good statements to make. But our obligations under the law is that this has to give notice that discussion is going to take place. And so if you believe that a citizen would know that the discussion we're having right now is going to take place under this particular agenda item, then please continue.
Well, I think 33% is part of the ordinance that we're adopting, and that is my concern, is that the 33% and the implications that has on on how far apart our houses are, so.
And how moderate a change we're affecting, moderate though necessary change we would be affecting by adopting this ordinance.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, I'm not opposed to adopting this as an interim measure at this point, but I do think that we need to consider the implications of that and clarify how we are enforcing that, because like I said, I thought we had 25 feet between the setback between the two houses had to be 25 feet. So if that's not the way that's being interpreted, we need to figure out what we need to do to clarify that. So
That is fair.
anyway, okay, that's my 2 cents for the night. Any other comments? Discussion? We have a motion. We have a second.
I think we missed the second on it as well.
Sorry, I can't pull, I didn't have the correct. Let me pull it up here. I move adoption of ordinance 2023-04-05-08 as proposed.
And Bill would second it, right?
Correct.
Okay. So motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Did you vote as well, Sarah?
I did.
Okay.
And now we will pull up agenda item number 9, City Council discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to the Code of Ordinances, sections 107-3, definitions, and 107-71, maximum permissible height related to the definition of building height, residential and residential building height in the R residential zoning district.
And just as a point of information for purposes of voting on this particular, and because it was a recommendation from the P and Z not to approve it, it will take a unanimous vote of the people present in order to adopt it.
And I'll also say in the planning and zoning recommendation, they did not make a recommendation on section 107-71. We do have that included here in this ordinance. The reason it's included, it's not a substantive change, it's just a language change. So no language has been taken out or added in here. It's just been moved around for clarification.
Yeah, it's a change, again, it's a change in form, not a change in substance.
I would like to take a brief recess so we can read this.
Yeah,
I
think
was
that's
not
a good
aware.
idea.
Okay.
I don't know, is it a recess or we just
Sure.
take?
Well, or
You can
it's
take
up
a-
to you,
just-
Madam Chair, however you want to handle it.
I just need time, I haven't read the proposed change
Sure.
on 71.
I'm not either.
Okay.
Okay, so do we need to recess for,
We don't need to,
We-
it's up to you.
however you want to handle
what do you recommend?
I recommend a recess.
Okay, we will recess for,
Unless you have questions while you're reading it.
Sure.
I recommend that my recommendation is going to be that we eliminate the changed language in lines 29 through 39 of the proposed ordinance because none of us have seen it before tonight.
Okay.
Well,
It doesn't matter to me. It's purely a change, in form to make it read and flow smoother.
It's not been submitted to the council in time, or to the public in time for proper
It
consideration.
makes no difference to me one way or the other.
We can do that.
okay, and I will say that all 3
And
pages,
is
all 3 pages have those numbers, so you need
So
to say
this
which
is
page.
page
Okay.
2.
in the
It's on
future, we
front
need to
page.
have these numbered consecutively, please?
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I've always done it because what happens is sometimes we have very long documents and the numbers get larger and larger and it creates confusion,
This
so.
one's not that kind of document.
Right, I'll do it however this body gives me direction to do it.
One other
Anyway.
question
So
to
it's on
council.
page 2, the lines you were referring to.
I'll clarify that, but I have another
Okay.
question first. Is the language that's in lines 7 through 27 the same as was in the proposed 107-3 in our packet?
Yes, ma'am.
I see a change. The packet
Not
says for
intentional.
number 1, the elevation of the highest adjoining native
Which
grounds-
page, Brooke, which page?
as was in our packet.
Okay, so that was not an ordinance, okay.
If
I'm reading from the definition of 107-3 as proposed, as contained in the packet that was submitted for the public hearing. Line 1 says the elevation of the highest adjoining native ground surface, strike within. This goes native ground strike surface. So it's, I don't know what other changes have been made, but it's
There-
not the same.
Okay, it was intended to be identical, and if you, I don't know if that would work here, if we could approve it with
Sure, yes.
exactly those changes, and we can make those updates in the ordinance. That was an unintentional change. It should be identical. I'm sorry if it's not.
I'm proofing it here.
Okay. Yeah, it does look like surface was to be left in.
Well, the ordinance is written assuming that P and Z has recommended that we adopt this.
Right, but I'm absolutely, I don't think keeping the word surface or not keeping the word surface makes a difference in the substance of what's being accomplished here.
No, no.
Ground,
my-
ground means ground, whether you say surface or
That's,
not.
that's not my point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My point being that P and Z did not recommend that we approve this. And this
Right.
ordinance is written assuming that they did.
Right, and so that was another issue we run into, but having, both bodies make a recommendation at one meeting, is we don't know how the first body is going to make that recommendation, and so we do have options here. Just for everyone's understanding, I think Charlie already mentioned it, we would need 4 out of 5 council members total, so everybody here would have to vote to overturn basically the rejection from P&Z, but we can also bring back an ordinance at your next city council meeting that has any changes that you would like to see.
I think, personally speaking, I'd like to see this maybe brought back. I just don't, I feel like the fact that it wasn't recommended, that we adopt this and such quick turnaround, and then there's things in here that, sections that weren't, that we didn't see that are in here, and now I'm hearing that was not to be, I'd rather just kind of take a breath, a pause, and bring it back. I don't know if it can be done in 2 weeks, or if we have to public notice again, or.
We don't
already had
have
the
to.
hearing.
We've had the public
Already had the
hearing.
Okay.
Right.
I think we could proceed in one of 2 ways. We could amend the ordinance we just adopted to add the language as it was published for the public hearing for section 107-3.
Yes. we can.
And that is what I would propose to do.
Okay.
We have all looked at that. We know what that is. I haven't had a chance to read this new draft ordinance. And so I would amend my motion so that we adopt ordinance 2023-04-05XX related to yards, as proposed in item number 8, which we've just adopted, that we now amend that ordinance to add the amendments that were in the packet for section 107-3, so that we all know what we've had a chance to see what it is we are proposing for adoption tonight.
Okay.
Except that, that's no longer in the packet. And so those of us that didn't print it out don't.
What's the one?
It's in item number 5.
Yes, this
of
was
the
in
packet.
P and Z
Okay.
the public hearing of both.
It's the only difference we're talking about the word surface.
I think
Okay.
so.
It's not
And
in our.
Also for clarification, we do have the corresponding building code section 101-2C2. The reason, it was in the planning and
Let's
zoning.
take that up
Okay.
after we address this motion.
Okay,
I
okay.
have different comment on that.
Okay.
So there's been a motion.
Right. Is there a second? I have a second for discussion.
So I'm inclined to agree with Alec that I think, given this 2 more weeks so we can clean it up, so we can review it, so that we can get feedback from the community. I think there may be a feeling with the community that they're in agreement with planning and zoning, that it needs to be a holistic thing through the whole, and there may be a feeling in the community that this is a prudent interim measure that we should take, that would allow the committee to take their time and be more vigilant. And bottom line is, I personally am, when it comes to the building code, am just trying to fulfill on what the sentiment of the majority of the community is. I don't have a axe to grind one way or the other when it comes to the code. So I think giving it 2 more weeks, putting it out there to the community of, as you spoke to, that, you know, we've said, here's your opportunity to speak, and nobody showed up. But I do think that gives us 2 things. It gives us a full city council voting on it as well. It gives us more time to review, and it gives us 2 more weeks to get feedback from the community as to what their wishes are in regards to this. And you know, if they agree with the 4 members of the planning and zoning that, you know, no, this absolutely has to be, then so be it. And if they want us to move forward, then they can let us know that. And I don't think 2 weeks for something this big is that necessary, also given the fact that we would have to have a full supermajority. I don't think it's going to change the way this is going to go as far as the vote goes either.
Right.
So.
I have some further substantive comment about what this change would accomplish.
Love to hear.
And how this process has come about. This definition in 107-3 does 2 things. The changes by this amendment that would be made by this amendment do 2 things. One, they prevent gaming by defining that where you start the measurement of a slope is from the adjoining original native ground surface. That does 2 things. One, it's the native ground surface. And we heard people comment about that you can't, we have some builders that are building up lots and measuring, then to create the slope that gives them an extra 10 feet. So this would prevent that from happening.
So you're,
The second thing it would prevent from happening is allowing them to game the placement of a building so that they get the extra 10 feet. Instead of it being the perimeter of the actual house and slope below that house, you can, if you have a hill adjoining within 5 feet or a hump within 5 feet of the perimeter, regardless of the slope of the house, you get the extra 10 feet. That's gaming. This is what that prevents. And we've had some instances of that happening. So that's why I believe we could ask Mr. Bench from Planning and Zoning to address that, but that's why these two changes were thought to be particularly appropriate, irrespective of whether you change the maximum height of a building. This prevents the gaming between now and when we can get an ordinance that addresses and get the community input to address heights and how we deal with slopes. This doesn't change how we deal with slopes, it just makes it so that it can't be gamed. And that's happening currently. So what I will withdraw my prior motion. I would move that we ask council to bring back to the next meeting an ordinance that addresses the proposed changes to 107-3 for consideration by the council.
Second.
And, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
And just for clarification, since people do watch this, maybe, so when you're talking about, this is clearing up the situation that Ms. Rollison was speaking of, which is finished grade versus the native grade, correct? And the gamification of that instance, right? That's one thing.
That's one thing.
Okay, and the second thing is the assertion that there's no knowledge of any gamification currently occurring that we heard here tonight. So if it's possible to get that information as far as those specific properties, either to other members of the council or even to the public or something like that, I think that those type things can help point out those situations to make our citizenry aware of that type of thing. I think that's useful. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, if that's a possibility.
I hate calling out specific
I know.
addresses.
I do
and-
too,
and
and I
the-
think that's why it hasn't been done.
Yes.
But, I mean, the fact that we have had issues in front of us about the height, I mean, this is not, it's not here because
There's,
we just dreamt up, you know, why don't we do this? It's like, because we've had issues with it, that's why it's on the
And-
agenda.
and in response to Councilmember McDuffie, we've had no one from the building community come tell us that they have to have this 5-foot perimeter around their building foot in order to build a respectable home. We've had no one from the building community complain about any of the changes that are proposed in this proposed definitional change.
Right.
And so people that claim that it's a problem, let's ask them to give us those instances.
Well, and there's always the opportunity to take outline issues to the Board of Adjustment for possible remediation.
Exactly.
When those
And we've done
things
that, we've
occur.
done that where there was a problematic hill, we've addressed that directly.
Yep.
It doesn't have to, we don't need this to address a specific problem. We can do that.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, that would have been a crazy one if they'd pushed the house right up there and said 5 feet and they,
Right.
you know, that's
No.
14 feet taller than the flat lot, but they could have.
Well, and ultimately, both the homeowner and all their neighbors got a better solution as a result of
Right,
our action.
right.
I will,
So. Yes, sir.
Deeds Justice, 310 Pleasant Drive. Brooke raised something that I've wondered about. Has anybody solicited the opinion of any of the builders currently building?
yes.
You have,
Yes,
and they just didn't respond?
yes.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
We also have the opinion of the Austin Board of Realtors that this is an appropriate change.
Yeah, so I understand all this. I mean, I would just like to see, like, let's have a clean ordinance document that we have ahead of time, and in 2 weeks, if we don't have to have another public hearing, then we can just.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Okay.
So you
that's
have,
the motion and the second.
Mhm.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion passes
Uh,
unanimously.
and then I want to comment on the proposed change to section 101-2. We did not notice that section in our public hearing notices, and that section of the code does not apply to zoning. It only applies to the International Building Code requirements. And so I would say, let's put that on the agenda for the review committee and not have it, and not take it up at the council level.
Okay, we're happy to do that. Because it's not a zoning or code, it wasn't required to be part of the public hearing because it wasn't a zoning change. And it will create a conflict between, if you adopt this, it will create a conflict. So that's why it needs to be considered at the same time.
Then why wasn't it brought up before in each of we've had at least 5 hearings on this?
Sure.
So if that is a required change, city attorney, I would have appreciated this being brought up in an orderly way.
I apologize. I was not involved in the review of the code for purposes of what changes were to be made. This was brought to me, to my attention on Monday, and asked whether or not it would be appropriate and okay for it to be included in this agenda in order to ensure it was accomplished appropriately. My analysis was it is not a zoning change, was not required to be in your public hearing, and therefore could be placed as part of the ordinance if you wanted to adopt it as such.
It's not in our agenda either.
So that is in the public hearing and under that document for P&Z. And from the beginning, we told P&Z, these are 2 identical sections of the code. You only govern section 107. That's the zoning section. So that's the only thing that you actually have to hold that public hearing on, that we notice, because P&Z does not make recommendations regarding the building code. And so we've had that in the packet each time we've had this amendment up. They've always been on 2 separate pages. And I think maybe earlier on it had, a little disclaimer like this section is to mirror section 107, the zoning code section that is identical, but you actually don't have to act on that as Planning and Zoning Commission. And I believe we brought that up during all of those meetings. So it was not required to be published, and I would think wouldn't, because it's not a zoning section.
Well, it's not in the regular agenda either.
Well, it is. I am very comfortable with it from a legal perspective because
It's not mentioned in the regular agenda. The sections of the code are 107-3, 107-75, 107-76, 107-71.
Sure.
It's not mentioned. And so for me, that's problematic from a public information standpoint.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that I understand. Yes, ma'am.
In passing the ordinance, absolutely. We would recommend, though, when we bring the other one back, that we bring back a separate item with that corresponding change so that they don't create a conflict in our code.
Right. Well, that's kind
I
of the
want to
whole
hear
point
what
of
that
this.
conflict is, because when I read, when I read the definition that's 101-2, the preamble that precedes it says that this applies only in Chapter 101. So what is the conflict?
The building code governs the building and construction of homes. So does the zoning code. And if the building code gives one definition of height and the zoning code gives a different definition of height, and both apply to the construction of the same home, we have a conflict.
How is that term used in the construction of a home in Chapter 101? what does it address? I don't know if what I'm getting to is there a reason to have a different definition there?
Sure. So Bryce Cox with Denton Navarro, Richard Bernal, and Zach. Your section 101 with your building codes are local amendments to the International Residential Code.
Right.
And so what you've done is you've said, hey, the original definition for building height in the International Residential Code, we don't want to use. Instead, we want to use this definition. So you've already adopted that definition, which matches your current definition for building height residential in your zoning code. And so what we want to make sure that we have is consistency in those things.
But you use it for a different purpose. The two codes have different purposes. The two articles have different purposes.
Yeah, one is for the actual building permits versus your zoning regulation.
Well, the zoning regulation also has to do with the permits, but it has to do with height and yard and what is building height residential, what does it govern in the building code?
Sure, I can't give you a specific on that.
Is it even used?
I'm sure it is. Otherwise, you wouldn't have an amendment for it, in theory. So, I mean, we can get with ATS and identify those areas.
Can y'all look over that question
Sure.
and see if it's even used in that part of the code?
Sure.
Okay,
In
all
which
right.
case, our recommendation would be to bring forward an omission to remove that definition from
I
101.
would like that examination to be made so
Yeah.
that we don't create another issue.
Perfect. So either way, what we'll do is we'll make sure that we bring back something that's a companion piece or pieces so that we have consistency in the code and we don't create a conflict. Excellent.
I would like that assurance.
All right. There is nothing else on the agenda?
We're having there's something going on at the legislature right now. We're having some conversations. Do you mind just taking a brief recess so I can sort something out and see if we can fit something on this agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is it all right?
Yeah, something else that we need to talk about
It
tonight?
actually dealt with your agenda item dealing with yards. There's a bill on the floor currently that would restrict your ability to.
That has not passed and it's not effective.
I don't disagree with you, ma'am. I'm being torn in two directions here, and I'm being asked by the mayor to ask if we can take a quick recess to see if we can get some direction from council if that's going to be allowable under the agenda. And we can either do that or not. It makes no difference to me.
So you just need to talk to the mayor?
The mayor is hoping to get some direction that he can say to the legislature. He has the authority to the committee, that he has the authority of this body to say the city of Rollingwood opposes any legislative actions that restrict its ability to regulate the size of yards. It has to do with your yards. It is a gray area with respect to whether or not it fits within there.
I will say yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But if
we
y'all
will
don't, but if y'all don't want to have that discussion, I'm okay telling the mayor y'all don't want to
we
have
would
that
like- well,
discussion.
I think if I could get to here's what I
Hey,
would recommend.
Brooke, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. Is that long
5
enough?
minutes is more than long
5-minute
enough.
recess so they can talk, and then we will come back, and then we may not have anything else that we have to do, because
Well-
there's
right.
nothing else on the agenda.
I would like
So-
you to ask the mayor if he would be comfortable opposing that bill in its entirety. I have read the bill today. We got an email about it from and so I don't know that we need to limit it to yards. I would oppose it in its entirety.
And that was my
Okay.
intent, yes.
Okay. All right. We are going to take a recess for 5 minutes. Okay.
We're going into a closed session.
Yeah, briefly, yeah.
Good.
Okay, we are going to call the meeting back to order at 7:44. And we are going to take a brief executive session
Consultation with attorney.
for, consultation with the attorney about legal matters.
On the agenda, any,
Yeah,
What-
about whether or not we can take a motion at this meeting
on what?
on the mayor's, on a motion to authorize the mayor to oppose a piece of legislation on yards and setbacks at the legislature.
All right,
At 7:40.
I said 7:44.
7:44, okay.
They've got tags on it, but they don't have those,
So no, and then
Right,
no,
right.
timeout, no action, and then.
Okay, now is when I need,
Gavel.
Yes.
that works. Okay, we are calling the meeting back to order at 7:46. No action was taken. We have nothing else on the agenda.
Move to adjourn.
If there's nothing, okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Meeting adjourned.